Evening, everybody. It is 6:04 p.m. on the 2nd of March, 2023. I'm Mike Capuano. I'm the chairman of the planning board. With me tonight is Vice Chair Amelia Aboff, Clerk Erin Gino, Jahan Habib, Michael McNeely, and Debbie Howard Easton. And pursuant to Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022, this meeting of the Somerville Planning Board will be conducted via remote participation. A recording of these proceedings can be accessed at any time using the registration link at the top of the agenda. This meeting is being recorded. We have a number of items on our agenda tonight, all of which have been previously been opened, I believe, but certainly 200 McGrath Highway has been opened, has been heard. We will also have 256 to 260 Elm Street and 270 Elm Street that will be making a presentation this evening, and I'll have some discussion on the nature of the presentation for the public when I recognize that applicant. We'll also have two items of other business, which are guidelines for unit mixes, an update on that. As well as board elections. Our rules and regs do require board elections on an annual basis, and tonight is going to be that night. So what I'd like to do now, Erin, do you have the notice of public hearing for the Elm Street projects?
I do.
Would I ask you to be so kind as to read those into the record, please?
Absolutely. I will do them in the order in which they are on the agenda. So 256 to 260 Elm Street, P&Z 21-039. AP Davis Square Plaza LLC proposes to develop a LEED Platinum 4-story lab building in the Commercial Core 4 district, which requires site plan approval. And then 270 Elm Street, P&Z 21-042. AP Davis Square Plaza LLC proposes to modify an existing through block plaza in the Commercial Core 4 district, which requires also site plan approval.
Thank you very much. Those having been read into the record, it is the discretion of the planning board to continue with the agenda as it is listed on it with the items enumerated. So what I'd like to do is ask the applicant of 200 McGrath Highway to please be unmuted.
This is Raisa speaking.
I see. Present as necessary.
Raisa speaking. I do see Greg's hand up. And Greg, you have been unmuted.
Mr. Chair. Before we open this case, I'll be recusing myself from 200 McGrath. So I'm going to step away at this time and will rejoin the meeting when this matter is concluded for tonight. Thank you.
Either Raisa or I will shoot you a text.
Thank you.
For the record, we still have, yes, Debbie.
I just wanted to state for the record, I did miss the last meeting, February 16th, but I did view the recording and submitted the affidavit attesting to that.
Yes, right.
Thank you, Debbie, for reminding me, because I have the same thing to say. I missed part of the meeting last time around on the 16th and have watched the recording and have submitted the affidavit.
Okay. Does anybody else have any disclosures that they need to make prior to me announcing the fact that we have 4 members of the planning board who are ready, willing, able, and capable to move forward on this application? We will not, it is my understanding that there is a covenant that is being worked on between this applicant and the city that has not yet been executed, and it is the practice of the planning board not to act on applications until a covenant has actually been executed by applicants and the administration. But at the same time, this is an active application for which testimony has been taken, testimony has been received through written means. Comments and questions have been raised by members of the planning board, and tonight just continues our discussion on this application until we can and should move forward on it once the covenant has been signed. So if I could please ask the applicant, I think you have been promoted to organizer or presenter or whatever it's going to be. So I'd like to recognize the applicant team and have them make any further comment or presentations they have right now before the board enters into discussion.
Good evening, Chair Capilano and members of the planning board. This is Greg Karcheski with applicant. Our offices are located at 31 Union Square. Appreciate the opportunity before you this evening to talk about the project. We didn't have any specific presentation plan for this evening, but certainly are here to respond to any questions or comments that you as a board might have. We also have members of our planning team and transportation team here as well. So
For sure. I do want to take a quick review of the attendees because it was my understanding that Councilor Ewan-Campen might be in attendance and might want to address the planning board on this issue. I don't see him in attendees. Is he listed in staff? I do not see Councilor Ewan-Campen right now. Bryce, tell me if I'm missing him.
This is Raisa speaking. I also do not see Councilor Ewan-Campen.
For the record, I will say that the councilor did submit a written comment to the planning board that went beyond the period for public testimony. However, because he is an elected member of the city council, that is not considered public testimony, that is considered communication from an elected official, which falls outside of public testimony. The planning board has seen it, and I will presume that that will become part of the record. I don't know if Bryce, would you like me to read his email into the record for the benefit of the public, or how would you like us to do this?
This is Raisa speaking. It is up to the board if you wanted to put that on the record.
I would like to include it in the record. I think it has been. Did you send it to everybody on the board or just me?
This is Raisa speaking. It was shared with all the board members.
Okay. I'm just going to briefly summarize. The councilor had requested that we not take action on this item until certain items of concern were addressed by the applicant and by the neighborhood and by the city. The letter from or the email from the councilor will become part of the record, which will be posted with the entirety of the record of this particular application. If Councilor Ewan-Campen does show up, he is certainly more than welcome to address the board, but that might have been kind of in lieu of an in-person presentation. What I will say is a lot of the comments that I recall hearing in concern for this application last meeting involved some of the concerns that were raised by the councilor in his email to the planning board, which involved some of the transportation and mobility and traffic concerns that were raised by members of the Brick Bottom neighborhood. And I think we have, and I think I asked to have present tonight a staff representative from the mobility division who might be able to address at least the staff's perspective on some of the concerns that were raised by members of the public and perhaps by the councilor as well. So I'm hoping we might be able to have the staff person be unmuted first, just to be able to have a brief overview.
This is Raisa speaking. Justin Schreiber from Mobility is present tonight. Justin, you are now a panelist. You may speak as you wish.
Good evening, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're a little faint, but yes.
So no, there's no specific presentation from mobility staff, but I can answer any questions that
Yep. So yeah, I wasn't expecting a presentation, but some of the concerns that were raised involved some of the backup around the Brick Bottom neighborhood, along with some of the issues with converging a bike path into the roadway that was between the applicant's project and the Brick Bottom neighborhood, and kind of traffic concerns in general. I'm hoping you might be able to just give an overview of the staff's assessment of the mobility plan that was presented by the applicant, because it is something that the city at least signed off on at an initial matter, and then we've also received a supplemental staff memorandum that incorporates certain revisions that I think were done in consideration of some of the concerns brought up by the neighborhood. So I was hoping you might be able to go over those.
Sure. So I think I could talk a little generally, but then I think it'd be helpful if there were sort of specific questions and concerns raised, it'd be a little easier to respond to. But I think in general, there's a very robust mitigation package proposed, and in the staff report, there's sort of additional recommended conditions that go above and beyond what is proposed by the guidance. So really the goal of that is to minimize the impacts on the Brick Bottom neighborhood, understanding that the trucks using the loading area for this project would be exiting down Summerall Ave extension, would be going into the Brick Bottom neighborhood. Our goal is to then get those vehicles back out and back to the neighborhoods as quickly as possible. So what that looks like in practice is you'll see a condition, and I apologize, but I don't have the specific number, but there's a condition regarding infrastructure improvements to the intersection of the Fitchburg and Summerall Ave extension of Linwood Street. And the intent there is an intersection design that encourages all the local traffic to use Linwood Street rather than going further into the Brick Bottom neighborhood. You'll see another condition related to Linwood Street itself, where we do anticipate the majority of truck traffic will be exiting the Brick Bottom neighborhood. There's a condition relating to sidewalk improvements, so that folks are not having to deal with being next to large vehicles on very, very narrow sidewalks. The intent there is to significantly widen the sidewalks there and provide a much nicer pedestrian experience.
I did see that one of the proposed additional conditions in the staff memorandum, supplemental memorandum rather, included some wider sidewalks as well. One of the issues that the councilor brought up in his email, which is something that I'm hoping you might be able to talk broadly about, is the concern that the intersection with Linwood is not a T intersection, is not perpendicular, and it's a little bit tricky to navigate. I'm wondering if you might be able to talk about the city's plan, if at all, right now, to ameliorate the difficulty of an intersection that's not perpendicular.
Sure. Just allow me one moment to make sure I'm referencing the correct condition.
Yep, no, for sure. And if this is something that's still in progress, one of the issues I can represent to you that the councilor has written is that the city knows this is a long-term plan, and his desires that this be fixed kind of in the short term, so that if and when this application is approved, that it be incorporated within this and not something that happens, 5 or 10 years after the fact.
So one of the conditions we're asking for is improving the intersection of Summerall Ave extension and Linwood and Fitchburg. And it says in there to discourage vehicles from turning onto Fitchburg Street. So I think the intent there is a design that does tee off the intersection with Linwood Street. We're just going to physically change the curb lines there, and may even go further than that to make the dominant traffic movement swing left all the way around the street. So I think it's going to look a lot different than that intersection looks like today. So I understand the concern, but we're talking about a complete intersection redesign, which allows us to do that teeing off and to sort of redirect the majority of traffic to continue onto Linwood Street instead of going further into the
Do other members of the planning board have questions of mobility staff at this time? Yes, Aaron.
I was actually wondering, so there's sort of like a current sort of to be after this, or states of traffic, right? This is sort of a question. We've got current state of traffic, a proposed to be traffic by the applicant for after sort of construction, but then also many long range changes, right? So this is redesigning this sort of path of Scary Way, going into off of Somerville Extension, the grounding of McGrath Highway, the redesign of the Milk Square area. There's sort of a lot of changes in the Union Square East subplan and also the draft Brick Bottom neighborhood plan, at least as far as I see it based on sort of looking that stuff up. My question is, when mobility is assessing this and when the applicant is coming forward, how much of that long-term plan is taken into consideration in the traffic mitigation and traffic calculations? We've got kind of, at least from my perspective, a really big project, like a 100-year building with some pretty significant roadway changes that might be coming up in 5 to 10 years. So I guess I would like to understand, to what extent possible, how do we envision mitigation? Like, are our mitigation conditions for now, or are they mitigation conditions that would also mitigate potential impacts from a redesign or a known redesign that's going to happen short term, although maybe not tomorrow? And please ask me if that's not clear. I can try and clarify further, but I'm just trying to understand. We've got, sort of a present condition, a future condition, a future condition that isn't so far down the line. And how do we wrap our heads around this, and to what extent does mobility consider that when looking at these plans?
Yeah, so I can give some overview. I guess I do think if we want to get into the details of the traffic analysis, we probably want to invite the applicant or their transportation consultant to discuss. But in general, the TIS is going to add in intersections that don't exist today to evaluate them. Like, for example, in the TIS, they're evaluating intersections at the different site driveways. And then, you reference sort of the conditions now and the conditions in the future. We have sort of the existing conditions in the TIS. We have a condition called the build condition, which ignores everything else going on and just adds in the project trips. And then we have that future condition. So that future condition is intended to take into account, all of the other development projects in Somerville. Those trips get added in. And then, depending on the exact TS scope, there's some sort of background that's assumed as well. So, with that being said, our primary way of analyzing it is based on the project generated trips, because the future projections tend to be extremely conservative. And I will say that TIS in general is a conservative document because it has a different mode split than we're asking that to commit to in their mobility management. So I guess the TIS is sort of the conservative business as usual scenario. And then we're doing a series of things through mobility management to make sure that that is actually not the scenario that ends up happening. Right. So the TIS, I believe, assumes around a 50% that people will drive, but we're asking the applicant to commit to 25% by 2040. So in general, we're using the build conditions, the project data matrix, when we try to evaluate the impacts of the project, because that feature condition includes a whole lot of assumptions for other projects that tend to be extremely conservative. And then, the last thing I'll note is that the TIS here, it reflects the original building program, which is much bigger than the building program we have today. So just one more piece of information of just how conservative it tends to be. So I hope that's a helpful response. If I missed something there, feel free to follow up.
Okay. So I'm just going to recap just to make sure that I understand correctly, and you can correct me if I'm misunderstanding here. The TIS that we have is a conservative estimate based on the current intersection sort of fate, or the current intersection plans, and basically this building has been built. After it's been built, given the current intersections, this is kind of what we anticipate using a very conservative mode split. And then the sort of road redesign portion of it may be an addendum, but it's not going to be included necessarily in any of those calculations or that particular TIS. Am I understanding that sort of correctly?
You're correct. I mean, it can include assumptions that we know. For example, we know road dynamic graph. It's already in process. It's not going to know what a future intersection, how that's configured.
Yep.
That being said, it does, the intersections that it does include are all intersections that would remain.
Okay.
There are a couple intersections that aren't rough configured because they don't exist today. That being said, there isn't really a way to reliably do that analysis because we don't know exactly how this intersection is going to be. But at the same time, like you said, it's a quite conservative analysis, and the MMP is really intended to bring that much, really cut it in half and bring it much, so it reduces the price.
That helps me. I need to digest it a little bit, but that certainly helps me to sort of understand this current TIS scenario and how to interpret some of the numbers that I was looking at in terms of estimated car trips. Another question, if I may. The other question for mobility is really around if the development or if any of the sort of work being done now would inhibit or even delay sort of redesigning some of these intersections which are outside of the application to the future state. And that's more of a planning question than an application question, perhaps, or a mobility planning, traffic planning question.
I think the best answer to that is that we've tried to protect against any concern that we are going to preclude something in the future through the conditions that you see in the staff report. So you can see there's conditions related to the width of the thoroughfare one. There's a condition about showing the conceptual alignment of that street prior to moving ahead, and that's really key for us because I think we feel that the alignment shown in the application materials may not be exactly what we need if this street is going to sort of replace Medford Street and be the new connection over to Poplar Street. It's really important that it lines up well with Poplar Street and that it can make a nice, neat intersection with the future ground in McGrath. So I guess I think the best answer I can provide is that we're trying to prevent, any precluding things that are important and meet city goals in the future, and sort of building in those protections along the way.
Okay. No, that's helpful as well.
And I'm also like, if there's a specific piece of that you're concerned about, I can maybe put more detail on it, but just trying to speak in general to start.
Yeah, no, that helps. I was just wondering if there were sort of any, not red flags, because you guys would have noted that, but light orange flags, I guess, in terms of like we've got a big development, other things happening in the neighborhood. There's a whole mesh sort of happening there. So really just to make sure that we're sort of thinking about this holistically. But no, that certainly helps. And I think, in particular, just understanding the scope of the TIS was very helpful, and the assumptions therein. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions of staff or the applicant at this time? Okay. Seeing none, what I'm going to do is thank Justin for coming tonight, and this will all certainly be part of the meeting minutes when they are drafted and posted, and a copy of this, of course, will be available online. So the next meeting that we have is March 16th. So I would like to move to continue this agenda item to March 16th, seconded by Aaron. I'd like to ask Raisa to call the roll.
This is Raisa speaking. Michael Capuano,
Aye.
Aaron Gino,
Aye.
Shahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
Agenda item is continued. I want to thank the applicant for coming here tonight, even though we didn't get a discussion with you. We didn't want you present, so we could ask staff some questions based on concerns raised by the neighborhood and by the counselor, and that were addressed in a supplemental staff memorandum. So thank you, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
If I may.
Yes.
Sorry about that. I know since this is being continued and potentially the applicant is still online, and given what we disclosed about the counselor's note, and what we just talked about with transportation and the TIS, there's a high likelihood I'll have more questions for the applicant next time this meeting comes up. So I would encourage the applicant to look through both the written record, the neighborhood comments that are available, and then also the counselor's comments, which are going to be part of the public record, so that we can discuss those the next time this comes around.
This is
As one member.
Yep, no, for sure. This is not something that is guaranteed to arrive at a vote on the 10th at all, 16th. It's certainly something that will just foster additional discussion, and when the planning board feels like it is ready to vote on this application, it will do so. This will absolutely have some additional discussion questions and some back and forth. So I want to thank the applicant, and I would like to invite Victor to be unmuted and share your face if you want to talk about the Davis Square neighborhood plan, which is something that has been in progress since I want to say I was in like fifth grade, but we'll see.
This is Raisa speaking. Mr. Chair, I'm just letting you know that Amelia has been notified to come back to the meeting.
Yep, that's right. Good. So let's hold on a second. Okay, for the record, I just want to say that Amelia has rejoined us. We now have a panel of 5, and I would invite Victor to be unmuted.
Hello, Chair. Thank you for having me. Just for clarification, is what you're looking at this point an update on the current status of the plan more generally?
Yes, unless you have more to share with us.
No, I just want to make sure there wasn't a specific aspect of it that you want me to address.
No, this is something that I remember we started in give or take 2017, 18, 19, and we're now in 23. So kind of curious where we're at.
Yeah, there was a process that resulted in a document that was never approved, as you're familiar with. So what we did after that was stake all of that information and that progress that had been made, but kind of go back to the drawing board. That is the current status of the plan. I am actively working on producing an internal draft that leadership will review within the city. This new draft of the plan reflects the progress and ideas that were made during the previous neighborhood planning process, but we are approaching it as a new process. Too much time has gone by since that original plan, as well as changes to the neighborhood and new developments that to not go back and review and rethink the whole plan as a new plan didn't seem advisable. The plan changed the focus a little bit. It is really more focused on the commercial core of Davis Square, as well as enhancements to the public realm and how those enhancements could help businesses in the area thrive. And another key point of focus too is creating more pedestrian space for people to socialize and experience the businesses in the area. We've made a lot of progress internally in terms of conversations with both our mobility divisions and public space to have some ideas of how we're going to expand that and improve that public realm. And in terms of timeline, my intention is to share an internal draft with leadership by the end of this month. And once we receive feedback from the mayor's office, as well as other leadership, we will then plan a community event to share some of these updated ideas with the neighborhood, at which point we'll have a better idea of how quickly we can move forward, depending on the kind of feedback that we receive.
Can I ask a historic question that I think I recall, but it's kind of hazy in my memory because it's been so long? When you say that when you said the plan was never adopted, I recall that the planning board did take action on recommending adoption of the neighborhood plan after quite a bit of public testimony and engagement. Can you remind me where the hang-up took place in the adoption of this one during the first go around?
I will prefer to circle back and give you a more concrete answer to that, because I wasn't, at the time, I was not the person who was handling that part of the plan. The sort of new version has been passed on to me after I changed to a new role as senior planner. And so while I have some idea, I think I would prefer to give you a better answer by going and chatting with Dan Bartman and Melissa Woods, who is no longer in the plan division, but within the city, to get a more specific answer from them about exactly what transpired there.
For sure. I just remember a couple of really great and engaging meetings that we had with a whole bunch of neighbors and stakeholders in the Davis Square area in the old Somerville High Auditorium pre-pandemic. And I'm just kind of curious where things went awry, whether it was the pandemic itself or any number of other factors. So I would appreciate that. Thank you very much.
So,
Does anybody have any other questions or comments for Victor on the status of the Davis Square neighborhood plan? Okay, seeing none, I want to thank you, Victor, for your time tonight. And it's not even 7 o'clock yet, so we'll let you go.
my pleasure, and I'm sure I will be circling back with all of you on more details as they develop.
Thank you, my friend. Okay, next on the agenda are two projects that are related. 256 to 260 Elm Street and 270 Elm Street. I would invite the applicant and the applicant team to be unmuted and be prepared to share, but prior to you starting, I want to make a couple of notes for the public and for the board prior to hearing this presentation. It's my understanding that staff has not yet had the opportunity to make a full review of the materials that have been submitted by this applicant, and because of that, there is no staff memorandum or official recommendation one way or the other by staff and the administration. It is the usual practice of the planning board not to allow an applicant to make a presentation before the board until staff has had an opportunity to present or to rather review the entirety of an application and run it by the appropriate city departments and make a recommendation to the board such that a presentation can be made both to the board and to the public on a complete application with complete review with all of the relevant city departments. That is unfortunately not the case here. So what I want to do is, although I will be opening up testimony this evening on this application, what I'm going to suggest, and it's certainly members of the public's discretion as to what they choose to do. We will, I expect we will have a staff recommendation by the time we reconvene in a few weeks. That will take into account a lot of issues that they have not yet had a chance to assess and weigh in on and make recommendations on. At that point, I will consider that to be new information being presented to the board, which is a recommendation of the administration on what the planning board ought to do here. And I will be reopening testimony in 2 weeks on this, or whenever the staff has a formal recommendation to the planning board. So what I would suggest is for members of the public right now to understand that this is preliminary, somewhat premature, and the recommendation of the planning board's assessment of the project may change with what the staff does present to us in its review of the materials that was submitted, I believe, on Friday by the applicant. So if you want to make testimony, you're certainly free to do so tonight, but I would encourage you to perhaps reserve that testimony until we have a kind of complete picture going forward when we bring this up with a staff recommendation, because that will be the complete application. That will be what is actually before the board in its entirety. And so I don't want to have you say one thing now and then it might be addressed in the staff memorandum that might completely change the way you think about it, or it might be kind of resolved by the staff memorandum and proposed conditions. You are certainly free to speak tonight if you want, but just the logistics of this particular application, because we are kind of going outside of our normal practice by allowing this applicant to present without a staff memorandum. This is because it's a significant project, to be fair. This is something that if I were a member of the public, I want to be able to comment on what the final product is and staff recommendation. but for sure you can comment tonight if you want. I welcome you to watch the presentation because I'm sure there will be a pretty thorough one this evening. The planning board will be probably asking some questions and making some comments, both of the applicant and of staff, and perhaps that will inform your testimony either tonight or the next time we reopen testimony when we have a staff memo. So I just wanted to have that as the framework by which we're going to review this presentation tonight. So what I'd like to do is invite the applicant to be unmuted and have their screens shared and to address the planning board as they deem fit.
This is Raisa speaking. I see Ryan Kroberum's hand raised. I believe he will be the presenter tonight. And Welch Lyles will be the speaker as well. Welch, you have been unmuted. You are self-muted on your end. Ryan, you have been made into a presenter.
Great. Thank you, Raisa. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Board. We appreciate the opportunity to present tonight. I do understand from your introduction that there's some concern with it being incomplete. I would like to clarify that it is one clarification related to the ACE.
Excuse me, one second, but before you continue, and this is going to go for you and anybody else that's going to be presenting, just if you could introduce yourself and your affiliation and address for the record, please.
Yes, sorry about that. This is Welch Lyles with Asana Partners. We are the property owner, and I'm joined this evening by Ryan Kroberum, who is our project architect, and Gautam Sundaram, who is also our project architect, both with Perkins and Will.
Thanks.
Thank you. And again, appreciate the opportunity to let us present this. Understanding that the staff memo has not been fully submitted, the application has been completed. We provided some clarification last week and feel that the presentation is full, so we'd like to go ahead and present to get this out to the public, and understanding that we'll have some opportunity in future meetings to address any additional questions, as long as that's all right with you. Great, thank you very much.
Yes.
Well, so we're very excited to be presenting both of these projects tonight. They have been in progress for quite some time. We started them designing in 2020, shortly after the UDO was adopted. Have been working closely with the Perkins and Will team, who I want to start by thanking for all their hard work on this, and also thank Raisa, Courtney at PSUF, all of the staff who has kind of helped guide us through this process over the past 3 years. But this is a big milestone for us, and so we really appreciate you guys taking the time to hear us and the opportunity to present this project to the public and to the planning board. So high level, I'm going to just give a high level introduction, and I'll kick it over to Ryan and Gautam to help present more on the details. We'll start with the building itself, and then we'll introduce the Civic Plaza, which is the two separate projects. So 256 Elm Street is a plus or minus 100,000 square foot, 4-story building that's proposed. It would be a LEED Platinum project and consist of approximately 15,000 square feet of ground floor retail that would open up onto the newly renovated and activated Civic Plaza at 270 Elm Street, and be designed for future life science or creative office space on the upper 3 floors. And with that, to date, we have had several meetings over the past multiple years with both the neighborhood and community outreach, many meetings with staff and PSUF. We have gone through the full UDC process and the historical review process and multiple engineering reviews, as you can see here, and believe that, you know, through all of these efforts and collaboration with many, many different partners here, we have a project that, you know, Somerville and Davis Square can be proud of, and we're, you know, looking forward to presenting it. So with that, Ryan, I'll let you jump into the details.
Thank you, Welch. I appreciate that. I wanted to start tonight just to talk about some of the zoning constraints on the site and how the project specifically addresses those. This project, has been mentioned, is a CC4 zoning that allows us for a 65-foot height, an allowable floor plate of up to 35,000, and then it provides some ground floor heights and floor-to-floor heights. But you'll notice that our floor plate, given the kind of zero lot line condition on our plaza, or excuse me, on the building, our floor plates are roughly 21,000 and change. But the existing condition that you would know today, the two-story project or two-story volume is currently where Chipotle is. This two-story is where Starbucks is. This is the open space in between. So when we started the project, just to understand the massing, the kind of as of right conditions, we could go 4 stories, but we made a very deliberate decision very early on to be as contextually sensitive to this very, very important place, this place that is very near and dear to our hearts as people who spend a lot of time in Somerville, especially in Davis Square, and that the building being 4 stories on the street may not have been the most appropriate way to start the project. So one of the first things we did, in addition to recessing the retail, was to also recess the 4th floor down to create a kind of 2-story volume at the street to bring the scale down. And we've done that both on Elm and Herbert Street. So that was a kind of fundamental massing decision that happened very early on. And then once we've established this kind of massing and making sure we're complying with all the zoning constraints on the property, it became very important to us to draw upon the place, to make this a place that is a place where people gather and people meet, and a real catalyst for civic destination in Somerville. So we looked at the 58-day building. We looked at a lot of the materials around the site, looking specifically at the adjacent building at 260 Elm with the kind of limestone cladding on that face and how the project might respond. And what we decided to start to study is that those very beautiful textures of the past certainly could be in a way reinterpreted into a more contemporary condition using the same material or the same tone of material. So working with pattern and texture of the brick, and also looking at more contemporary cladding like terracotta for the facade that is aligning with Elm Street and Herbert Street. And so we drew early on this kind of diagram that really started to talk about how the Civic Plaza is the heart of the project, and that's what you're seeing here, kind of in yellow. And that the building in a way is stepping down towards the streets, but always creating a new kind of catalytic relationship with the open space, and starting to think about how the project might have 2 different faces. One face towards the street that might become lighter in tone, more referential to the limestone facade you just saw, and then a more kind of contemporary masonry facade facing the existing 58-day building. So when we started with the UDC process, we presented a number of kind of facade scenarios to them. Overwhelmingly, we received a lot of support about this idea we called the bookend, and that effectively is that the ends facing Elm and the end facing Herbert Street might be treated slightly different and kind of match the tone of the street condition, while the brick box behind, if you will, would address the same height and scale of the brick 58-day building. So we tried to lay out these elevations. So we really tried to make a kind of very sensitive and contextual project, something that fit within the scale of the city, something that really activated the ground plane and created a new civic plaza that had this direct relationship that would really engage the neighborhood in a dynamic way. So you're starting to see the kind of front elevation of the entirety of Elm Street, all these buildings I'm sure you know quite well, and making some very precise and discrete updates to the 274 building, and then really letting our building really create a kind of contemporary partner or relative, if you will, of what the existing condition is. So at a closer scale, again, this is just to give you a reference. This is where Chipotle is. This is where the current Starbucks is. A couple of deliberate material moves. So could we start to find and study materials that match the tonality of the limestone cladding that's just very thin on the Elm Street side? Could that become reinterpreted with some sort of terracotta rain screen? That seemed to make some good sense. Then the brick box behind, could that match the same kind of brick tone or the same kind of brick texture of the 58-day building that you see in the background? And so we, again, through the UDC process, we worked very closely with them about really trying to make sure that this Elm Street corner was open to the street and became a very engaging, almost porch-like quality. So we subtracted back the retail, we held back the retail here, created a new kind of covered condition that we really like to think is a porch to the civic space and a new kind of sheltered gathering place along Elm Street. That seemed to be a very productive way to continue. We've studied the materiality of the terracotta and the signage with them, all things that we ultimately felt like after 3 UDC meetings really helped the project be better. And so I'm going to conclude just with a couple of views from the Elm Street side. This is again where Chipotle is currently located. The new building here, the activated ground floor with the roughly 15,000 square feet that Welch spoke about. And then the kind of contextually modern approach to the building and the architecture. Just a view looking back towards Elm Street. This is roughly where the existing bank is, in trying to start to set up a really dynamic and engaging pedestrian experience. Facing the existing building, this is the brick portion, if you will. You're starting to see how there's a very clear logic about how the structure meets the ground, and then in those bays in between becomes retail, or it becomes a kind of mid-block lobby, which we think will really help activate the length of the entire civic space. And then starting to look at some inspiration about the existing openings and the existing proportions of the windows on the 58-day building and how they might inspire a more elongated profile that still feels related to the existing building. The other elevation of the project that's quite important to us is the Herbert Street elevation. Again, you're seeing the side of 58-day, the existing 58-day building, and trying to create a very similar type of architecture on this facade where we're not making a 4-story building, that we're bringing the scale down, having an activated retail frontage, creating a newly accessible pedestrian and civic realm, or civic space, excuse me, that Gautam will speak about in a moment. But this, again, is something we studied quite closely with the UDC, trying to make sure we got the right proportion and making sure it felt as kind of contextual as we possibly could make it. A couple of ways we did this on a kind of a closer scale is really starting to look at the datums of the existing building, how those might translate or kind of project across and inform the floor elevations of the new building, and taking what was quite a little bit tired and exhausted facade facing Herbert Street and creating a very vibrant new place. Again, here we did a number of studies in the detailing and the tectonic, all reviewed by the UDC. Came back that these ends, these bookends, if you will, could read like a very beautiful plane, crisply detailed, and very, very elegant on kind of floating above this the retail. So here's a final rendering of what that might feel like. This is a farmer's market was going on, the very vibrant farmer's market that happens on the adjacent parking lot. That view back across the new Civic Plaza that Gautam will speak about in a moment, and just the potential of this new architecture at 256 Elm.
And I think in addition to the architecture, it's important to talk about the programming of the building as well, now that you have a sense for it. As I mentioned earlier, we have 15,000 square feet of ground floor retail and an additional 5,000 square feet of, I would say, clear story kind of retail from Herbert Street. Of that, 6,000 square feet will be dedicated to ACE type uses. And we have been working with the city, and in our development covenant have agreed to keep 2 of the 3 Elm Street facing suites at below market rate to make them affordable for local businesses and uses. And it also stems over to outside of this project to the renovation and work that's being done at 58 Day Street that will be creating new retail bays both on Day Street and onto the new activated Civic Plaza to give it really a true community feel and the gathering space in Davis Square, in addition to the great environment atmosphere that exists there already.
So Chairman Capiano, that concludes the 56 to 260 component. And I apologize, I'm Ryan Kurlbaum with Perkins and Will. I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning for the record. But if you would like to open it up for testimony, I believe is what Raisa had recommended. We're happy to do that. The next part of the presentation is about the Civic Plaza that Gautam will speak to.
Well, what I'd like to do is have a presentation on the plaza as well. I mean, they are 2 separate projects, but they are cohesive.
Excellent.
This is Raisa speaking. Gautam, you have been unmuted. You may be self-mute on your end.
Thank you, Raisa, and good evening, Mr. Chair and Planning Board members. My name is Gautam Sundaram. I'm a principal and I lead our urban design and landscape architecture practice at Perkins and Will, and been collaborating with Welsh and Ryan and the overall team on the overall project, and we'll share more with you on how that has evolved to where we are today. So I'm very excited to share both of these projects with all of you today. Ryan, do you want to go to the next slide? Thank you. So as we look at the opportunity from the civic space, I think that has been a key anchor for us from the very beginning as the opportunity that we feel is going to energize the project. And you've heard from Brian on many of some of the urban design goals. So when we look at where it's located, and from our early conversations with PSOF and staff and Courtney and others, is to also look at what are the open spaces around Davis Square right now, and mapping out what are some of those opportunities of what they offer to the neighborhood. And so we went through a very detailed process of looking at all of the types of amenities that are and how those open spaces are used, primarily to understand how can what we are trying to do at Davis Square differentiate itself and really add to the overall open space and social fabric, and really try to create those types of amenities and opportunities that we very much need, and how it can help energize this neighborhood too. So those are the key drivers in looking at how we want to think about the Civic Plaza itself. We went through a process of rezoning where the open space has been committed as a civic space, and that's from the owner to really make sure that it is maintained as a civic open space for the city, for the neighborhood, and always continue to be an integral element of the entire Davis Square culture and fabric. Next slide. And so we from the very beginning, we really thought about this open space to be a key element, as I mentioned earlier, and we called it the seventh spoke, as a really building upon the civic realm of Davis Square, of the streets and the pedestrian walkways that really make this very unique with the types of activity, and thinking about how the plaza should really be an extension of that civic realm and be a place that is going to help us catalyze the rest of the public realm as you start to think about what the future of Herbert Street and some of the parcels to the southwest would as well be. And so thinking of this plaza to be that seventh spoke. A key part of this zoning effort was to also make sure that we are following through with all of the civic space, the through block space guidelines. And what you see on the right-hand side are all of the guideline requirements that really specify the number of trees that we should have, the amount of green space that we should have, key goals of pervious paving, seating, flexible opportunities for flexible seating as well. And all of these are driven by what the overall square footage of the open space is. It's a very linear space, and I'll show you some photographs as well. In width, it varies from 46 feet as it's facing Elm Street towards Herbert Street. It narrows down to about 36 feet. And what we wanted to do was not to sort of take this as an accounting list of all of the things that we need to check the boxes, but really take the spirit of what we're trying to achieve here and make sure we go over and above on many of these aspects and make them integral to the overall concept and design. Next slide, please. And so here are some photographs to help you understand sort of what the current state and conditions are. So this is a photograph when you're looking from Elm Street towards Herbert Street. You see the two buildings framing. The overall dimensions of the open space are going to be consistent and very similar to what are the current spatial conditions as well. But what you start to see here are a series of fences, signage and wayfinding elements, and really the overall number of impediments that really not allow for this to be a contiguous type of a civic space, and the things that really start to move away from how you'd want to see this to be a much more open and organic space. Also, it shows you that the character of the space has always been more like a street, like an alley, that really functions more from as a connector. And you can specifically see that on the next slide when you're more within the space. And so here you can see the finishes are mostly concrete paving, but we take advantage of how the building meets the ground as an opportunity to connect, and you really use the civic space as a way that connects the thresholds on either side as well. And then finally, also as we look back from Herbert Street side, it's completely fenced off right now, and it's controlled, and in most days it's probably open as well. But then what I want to bring your attention is the sets of stairs over there. And this plaza is currently not an accessible plaza. It does not have the inclusivity from an access standpoint as you're thinking about a connection from Elm Street to Herbert Street. I just want to bring that to your attention. And also looking at the edge condition along Herbert Street, when you think about the street improvements, it feels like the backs of the buildings. And we don't want this to feel like the backs. We want to really make this that is going to continue to add more energy and continue to build on the civic realm of Davis Square. Next slide. So as we started to think about what should this be, we're of course drawn as planners and designers start with history. As students of history as to how infrastructure and development both have really been critical in shaping what Davis Square is today, and to think about how we would want to see the civic spaces to be part of that type of a fabric and reimagine what the spaces want to be around what the new mobility systems and future connectivity systems are of where we are today. Okay. Similarly, we're also drawn and inspired by what used to happen in the existing building. It used to be a solar enlarging studio where they would enlarge photographs, and it was an artist studio which would allow them to really create and enlarge photographs into much larger prints and other aspects. And why this is relevant is how we've thought about the plaza as a way of bringing some of these types of dynamics into the paving patterns and other elements in there, in a way to sort of be remind us of the history of what used to be over here and continue to let that be part of the story and legacy of this place. Ryan described to you sort of, the civic space really is the anchor of how we've shaped the overall development. And so I won't spend too much time describing this, but really seeing that as an extension of the Davis Square and in a way starting to make that connection towards Herbert Street. But really activating that with active uses along the ground floor, and I'll show you a plan that responds to that shortly. This starts to show you from a broader context standpoint, we've always been very aware of what is the surrounding condition, the location of some of the open spaces, how it relates from a pedestrian flow to transit connections where we're expecting a lot of the pedestrian flow to be, and how can we make it much more visual and visible as well from many of these view corridors and where we expect pedestrians to be accessing this plaza too, and really starting to create ways about how it can contribute to how the rest of Davis Square continues to evolve and develop over time. And so working with UDC and working with Courtney and PSOF, from the very beginning, we started to develop a series of options all of them centered around thinking about not only how do we incorporate all of those through block design guidelines, but also how we maintain principles of inclusivity by providing strong access to really stitch the two sides in the building developments together. And so these were three options that we had developed. Everyone, and including us as designers, gravitated towards option 2, as that sort of showed how we were evoking and inspired by the history of what used to be some of the uses here with the solar enlargement as well. And so we took option number 2 and advanced that further. Good, right? And so here you can see how we continue to advance and really incorporate many elements of what we have learned through the process. And I'll share now more details about that. So we've sort of shown this plaza design with relationship to all of the ground floor uses. And the key always has been, as we showed in the existing photographs, this looks like a throughway right now. So what we want to do is how can we create moments of pause and activities. And so in order to accomplish that, how we have really shaped the retail facing with the development as well into the plaza, but then also trying to create permeability. We've taken to make the plaza accessible, we made the handicap accessibility a central feature of the plaza itself, and applied universal design standards. And these were through conversations with UDC members as well. And that is a concrete pavement that now connects all the way from Herbert Street to Elm Street and provides us an ADA access, and made that a central feature of the plaza too. And I'll show you some renderings of how we've accomplished that as well. We've wanted to also add spaces for moments for people to pause. And so that's why we've sort of added these 2 planters there that will be providing us large shade trees that really start to introduce urban ecology, but also start to create spaces for gathering and trying to create ways of how they would engage with each other. And so incorporating many of those through block guidelines as well, but by making them as features of it. The bands that you see sort of start to mimic how we're connecting towards the different doorway locations, but also trying to pick up on some of the angles that start to show how the history of the use has been. And then I'll walk you through more details about how we've reimagined the streetscape along Elm Street, and similarly as well along Herbert Street, to make it a much more pedestrian friendly environment. Programming of this has been very critical and at the forefront of our thinking to make sure that the space that we're designing is going to allow us the flexibility in the long term to really create and program for different types of events. So whether it is a music festival, the ability to start to add movable sort of stages and create those types of opportunities for programming for the community and bringing them together are very easily possible in this type of a space. Next slide. Thinking about how we could extend, sometimes in the parking lot on the south side by Herbert Street, there are farmers market. Is there a way we can extend the farmers market into the plaza as well and really bring that activity towards Davis Square, and trying to demonstrate how there are different ways we can accomplish that type of programming without impeding on the overall design of the plaza itself. Very similarly, if we had to have a food festival or a different series of types of events that Somerville continues to have, this could be a great home for those types of events, movie nights, food festivals, or other cultural events as well. This could be a great place and a home for bringing the community together. And then lastly, also demonstrating through different ways that we could even have art as a great way to be part of activating this plaza. And I think it'll be very helpful too. And we've engaged, I don't think we have the photograph here, but we also engaged with the Somerville School for some of the temporary phasing of the project and helping us activate some of the windows. And you may, if you pass by the project, you can see some of those paintings on the windows too, as a great way to start to engage with the broader community on really making this much more engaged with and connected to the community itself. Next slide. And so here you can start to see how those finishes come together and what the overall character of the space is, really trying to maintain as much as activity along the ground plane and making that transparent. We made the entire plaza to be pervious paving, so we go over and above what the requirements are. We're following universal design guidelines and city guidelines in maintaining concrete sidewalks as the accessible pathways, adding diverse types of seating elements as well that are facing different ways, but also provide opportunities for fixed as well as movable opportunities, adding more ecology and ground plane planting as well as a way to sort of try to bring a little bit more of seasonal interest and making that as a different way of creating textures and colors within the plaza too. We also introduced the idea of having catenary lights at the higher level as a way of trying to create a sense of canopy as well. So it starts to create a sense of space spatially that you feel like you're part of this, but also brings warmth and color during some of the fall and winter months as well as a way to enliven the space. Next slide. So this is now when you're more within the space, looking towards the entrance of the new building, but also by making 58 Day as well permeable. Now you're coming in from the entrance over there. And here you can see how we've been playful with the way we arrange the seating elements that they could face each other and really start to create smaller groups of discussions as well, and gives the flexibility about how the space could be evolved to how the community embraces it and uses it in the long term. Next slide. And then this is when we are all the way along Herbert Street. Here you can see the street trees that are along that will be planted as part of this project. Here you can see a set of stairs, but then also the ramp that is next to it as a key feature that is part of the paving band, but also a key part of the plaza element itself. And then planters on the side as great ways to sort of create a sense of gateway and coming into the campus, the plaza itself. And then the catenary lights extend all the way out towards Herbert Street, sort of creating that sense of a roof to that overall space. Looking for opportunities about how we can engage with artists and create murals and really start to make this more about what the community and the culture of the Somerville and Davis Square wants to be. We work with PSOF and staff to really make sure that all of the materials that we select not only are sustainable, but also are along the design guidelines and furnishings of Somerville. And so when we think about the plant materials, the understory planting, the light fixtures, all of these have been reviewed as part of it, and really trying to push over and above where we need to be from the design guidelines, like for example, with the pervious paving, with the tree planting, the trees, etc. All of those elements. Now I'll pause at the last rendering over here, where we truly believe that the way the project has evolved, not just from the urban design idea of the civic space, but also how now it has manifested into the built sort of concept. It would be a great great extension of Davis Square and really contribute to the overall public realm and what the opportunities and potential of Davis Square would be, and how we believe that the community could really benefit from and really enjoy the space. And with that, we'd love to hear your questions, comments.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I have a couple of questions and a couple of, I guess, comments. So my initial comment is, broadly, I like the presentation. I think it's pretty building. I think the civic space is really well done. But my questions, and of course, I think some may be mitigated by a staff review of the recently submitted materials. So if this is something that's going to be addressed by the staff memorandum, I apologize. My first question is about kind of the loading zone area.
Mm-hmm.
So it had been presented on Herbert Street, and as I recall it, and I think in my own mind's eye, but also in your rendering, there are some residential homes that are right behind it. What made the decision to include loading and trash areas directly across the street from people's homes as opposed to elsewhere on the property?
So this is Welch Lyles with Asana Partners. I'm happy to answer that. So really, it is how the property functions currently. And I think you can ask residents, and at a lot of our community meetings, the current parking lot and traffic situation is an open lot to where the dumpsters are exposed on the street. And they were actually excited that we were internalizing everything because it was actually much improving the current situation. So we do feel like it's very much an improvement from that. The loading and trash door will have an overhead door that we see actually as a opportunity for art and a mural or some type of community art piece, so that when it's down, it's not just an overhead door, it's actually something exciting and maybe that Instagrammable moment or whatever it may be. And then so that's the improvement piece, and really then it just came from a functionality, right? Elm Street, loading on Elm Street really wasn't possible, and so there has to be some sort of loading and trash just functionally for it. And so we've tried to make it as nice as we can off of Herbert, knowing that we had to pick a corner. And we love to try to make four-sided buildings as much as we can. And we always run into the problem where we kind of paint ourselves out of it, but you do have to have that one little section just from a functional perspective.
Yeah, no, I respect that. I also respect the fact that you indicated kind of early on and with the renderings and with your comment just now about trying to make a building that is appealable on each side. I can't tell you how many times this board has seen buildings that just have the back of a building, and it's clearly the back of a building, and it's not exciting, it's not engaging, and it's disrespectful to anybody that might be on any other side of the building. So I do appreciate that, so thank you. Now, when I was reviewing the materials that we had, I was looking at some of the notes from some of the neighborhood meetings that you've held, and some of the concerns that I saw, and I can understand them, potentially have to do with, again, I'm thinking the Herbert Street side, because those are where some residential homes sit. We're going effectively from a one-story building across the street from these folks to a three-story with a fourth setback. Do you have any shadow studies into how that's going to impact people's use of their homes and lighting? Thank you.
Chairman Capigliano, we did work through, this came up in both the neighborhood meetings and through the UDC, and we tried to be quite rigorous and follow all of the Summerville zoning requirements for times of year and times of day. And what we tried to show is that the existing massing is shown here in the red, and that our building is adding, it's taller, there's going to be more shadow, but as it moves, the sun's moving, kind of following my hand, so those shadows are always cast away from the homes on the south side, if you will, of the project. So it never, the new building massing does not affect those homes. And what you're seeing here is, we also just while we're here, we were asked about the height of the penthouse screen and how that might affect the shade on the plaza. And what we tried to show is that there was really no effect. There's no change between what the building would cast with a screen, because this effectively set back so far from the parapet that it didn't influence any of the shadows on the plaza.
My next question is on the way you describe the project as a series of it's not uncommon, a series of phasing, phases of development. And one of the phases incorporated the Day Street parcel that you have. I don't think I saw any part of this presentation that had to do with any of the development on the Day Street projects. I'm just curious as to why that was considered part of the phasing but not incorporated in this presentation.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. So the two buildings along Day Street, 58 Day and then 276 Elm Street at the front, are both existing buildings. We have already completed some facade improvements and interior renovations and are planning a full redevelopment and just renovation of both existing buildings and conversion. And so since the majority of that work is interior, it did not require the same site plan and planning approval processes as the other two projects did. But those both buildings are being fully improved. We went through a minor site plan approval for the window replacements and new storefront work that is part of it. And then similarly, we'll be going through a minor site plan approval for some of the screening that's associated with those projects. And then everything else will remain on the interiors.
Okay. Thank you. My last question at this point is not something the planning board can actually legally condition, but it is certainly something that we take into consideration and sometimes make requests and see where we can work if necessary. I looked at some of your materials talking about particularly the building that you're going to take down and build back up. Obviously, there are some longstanding tenants that have been in that building, and the concern that, I, as somebody who goes to Davis Square and through Davis Square every day, and also somebody who utilizes Davis Square and the neighborhood uses the storefronts that are there. What, if anything, because you did mention in your materials that you had been in discussions with the, or at least some of the existing tenants on renewing leases, figuring out kind of transition for some of these businesses. I'm curious where we are on that and what your plan is to help facilitate a transition for the buildings that will be displaced, for the businesses rather that will be displaced.
Sure, happy to speak to that as well. So for the existing building that we're planning to replace, many of those tenants' terms had naturally expired and they had kind of stayed in there on a month-to-month basis. We've worked with several of those to relocate to other spaces within the square. Davis Square Family Practice just opened a new store down the street. Sola Salons, similarly. Sugidama is under construction on a new restaurant that we've been helping them with on Elm Street, and they'll be opening in that new location in a few weeks and relocating. Starbucks, who I think is probably the least of everyone's concerns, I understand, they'll actually be relocating back into that current corner once construction's done. Boston Tattoo will be opening in a new spot in one of the existing buildings at 276 Elm Street, just across the plaza. And so we've definitely spent a lot of time working with each of the tenants in place, working with the Economic Development Office to help find them new homes and try and keep them in the square. And just like you guys, right? We appreciate those businesses here. We think it is the authenticity that drives everybody to want to be in Davis Square, and so definitely want to work and keep them. We also have the post office at 58 Day, who will be remaining in place. They'll be downsizing into a smaller section that aligns more with kind of their modern footprint and opening up some new retail space next to them on the corner there. But yeah, so have definitely worked with everyone as much as we can. And for those other tenants, we work through relocation packages, and I think have come to a fair and comparable agreement for everybody.
Thank you. Those are the questions that I have at this point. I'd like to invite my colleagues to make comments or ask questions as they would like. I see Amelia's hands. I would open the floor up to our distinguished vice chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some overarching feedback on this application that I would like to Chair, I have some additional specific comments and concerns that I would also be happy to discuss with the applicant after public testimony. But before we move on to that phase, if I can just say overall, I have a lot of concerns with this application and had fundamentally a difficult time following it as it was submitted to us in the review process. Finding it sort of confusing in some areas and sloppy in others, which really confused me coming from a firm as sophisticated as Asana, working with a design firm as sophisticated as Perkins and Will. The project narrative doesn't really reference anything that's going on in the balance of this project in terms of the other development project that you have underway. It's not clear really from that narrative whether Seven Spoke refers to the entire block development, to the specific building that's under review tonight in this application, or what. The square footage of the project appears in different places with 5 different numbers. I understand that sometimes we're going to see a gross square foot and net square foot or rentable square foot, but none of them are labeled as such. They're just used as square footage interchangeably, and they're sort of 25,000 square feet off in different places. So I don't really know how big this project is. The green score is not included in the zoning chart, but does appear in the staff memo. There's no material showing us how it's being calculated. There are references, as the chair mentioned, to project phases. And I understand that there was that 58 days being done as phase 1 here, but the notation or the nomenclature of the phases changes from one document to another. So the plans refer to this as phase 2, but other materials in your package refer to this as phase 1. The shadow studies show sun in the civic space, but the plans note that there will be a canopy over the civic space. I love that you started to draw attention to the idea of having, ADA accessible and sort of universal design standards in the civic space. That's something that's really important to me and to this board. But you just showed us 3 renderings that placed picnic tables, farmers market stalls, and children's playthings in that ADA accessible ramp. The building plans labeled building plans have one layout of a basement that bears no relation to the building plan set labeled basement on the updated area calcs document. So I'm feeling very alarmed by this, because any one of these I would have, not thought twice about, but taken together, this makes me really uncomfortable with the idea that this is an entity that's shown this little attention to detail and is about to develop a possible lab building or even undertake a construction project in one of the densest and most sort of densely utilized areas of our city. So I would really like you to consider revising your materials so that this board can be comfortable approving this project to move forward. I have specific comments on the project as well, but I feel like you've done yourself a bit of a disservice in submitting the application in this condition.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that feedback, and I'm sorry for the confusion that some of it may have caused. We'll certainly clean up those details. This project, as I mentioned, has gone through many iterations over the past 3 years, and there may just be some overlaps from some earlier iterations that we missed, and we'll be certain to clean those up to eliminate that confusion. Speaking to the phasing piece, and I think we have been a little confused on that as well, just because of the legal requirements to present these as separate projects throughout this whole process with separate addresses. Even though they all really tie together and really are one project, legally we've had to present them as separate projects, and that's, as I mentioned earlier, why 58 Day was not being presented tonight, why the Civic Plaza came second, why the green scores are 2 separate green scores for each. And so we just frankly and honestly have worked to navigate that, but it's created some confusion across the board. And so sorry that it didn't come through more consistently with that, but that's why they have been separated.
This board is familiar with reviewing civic space applications separately from building applications. That's something we do frequently. I'm referring to the fact that both the sort of the day project and how it relates to this, which you did explain in the presentation tonight, which I appreciate. But also the fact that I believe your mobility management plan refers to the building that is labeled as phase 2 in all of your plans as the phase 1 building. So I understand that there have been multiple iterations of this. And frankly, that's something else that I'm a little bit curious about, because I saw in your slides this evening that the last neighborhood meeting was held in November 2021, and would love to understand as we move forward what has changed since that time.
So really, since that time, it's just been adapted based off of the UDC recommendations, and we've had other community engagements and meetings with individuals in the community. That was the last, I guess, formal recorded adopted neighborhood meeting. But yeah, I understand your concerns. We'll certainly go through and make sure that there's consistency on naming of the buildings and phasing. The seventh spoke was intended to kind of refer to the overall, all 3 buildings and the plaza itself, with each building then being addressed by its own individual address. And then the plaza itself, the ADA concern, really the intention of showing the tables and the art, and it was more of a opportunity to show potential for special events and specific programming related to those events, not any permanent fixtures. And that's something that the community wanted to know, was opportunities for programming this and being able to utilize it as a public space, and that's why we were highlighting those. But I have definitely noted all of those concerns, and would be happy to set up a follow-up meeting after this for your other issues that you want to talk about.
Thank you so much.
Anybody have any comments or questions of the applicant or of staff before I open it up to public testimony? Yes, Erin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just really quickly, I would like to echo Vice Chair Aboff's concerns. I had similar concerns. For example, the tree planting renderings are very inconsistent and don't really seem to match the documents. So given that we have, I think, upwards of 12 to 15 documents per address and inconsistencies between the two, it does make it very difficult to assess the overall impact of this project. And yes, would definitely echo cleaning up sort of the entire document set so that we can accurately assess what's happening here, perhaps as part of the update that comes out with the staff memo. I mean, also echoing the neighborhood meeting that's been a year and a half ago, last formally, it might be worth reaching out to those same neighbors to give them the sort of updated, cleaned up set of, hey, this is what we're doing. And, there's been a lot of changes, but this is where we're at right now, just so there's, no confusion across this board or for anyone else. That would be, maybe my comment as another board member. Thank you.
This is Raisa speaking. If I can just add, the neighborhood meeting 2 was held on 2022. I'm not sure if the applicant's showing a different date, but it was held on 6/21/2022.
Thanks, Marissa. And thank you, Erin. Erin, did you have any other comments before I?
No, I'm all set, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay. Does anybody else have any comments or questions of staff of the applicant before I open it up to public testimony? Yes, Michael. Michael, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, hopefully last. I just had a couple quick comments regarding the sustainability documents that we have. I think I'm specifically looking at the ones that are under 270 Elm Street. So I see some comments talking about not having a permanent irrigation system being installed in the park. Yep. And I also know that there's some comments, and it's my understanding that your group is going to be responsible for the long-term maintenance of this area. And I was wondering if you guys could just kind of talk to your intentions for kind of the, general maintenance plan with the vegetation and kind of keeping it a healthy green space. As you showed in some earlier pictures, that corridor is pretty barren. And really excited about the green space here. Just want to make sure you've got a solid plan that you can kind of stick with.
Yes, yeah, happy to speak to that. So we are in the process of finalizing a easement and maintenance agreement with the city of Somerville that will both keep this as public open access as part of the civic space and meet everyone's goals of more pedestrian space, aligning with kind of the Davis Square plan that was discussed earlier. And with that, we'll also have a maintenance agreement which will outline landscaping, trash, cleanliness, and then just in general, we will have on-site engineers that will be and porters that will be taking care of the building and taking care of the space. Because as a retail focused and retail first investor, we want people to be there. We want it to be this lively, beautiful place where you can hang out and shop and spend your time. So that's our intention, and those are the documents we're working through to make sure that it's in stone.
Okay, great. And then I had one other element regarding the amount of retail and lab space. So obviously, I assume that the gas engine system that you're putting up on the roof, that's there for backup. Can you just kind of confirm that as opposed to primary power use?
That's right. It's emergency power.
Okay, great. And then, you also have a comment in your application about the option to be purchasing carbon offsets. I appreciate that it's very challenging to sign up for, a strict, we're absolutely going to buy 100% carbon offsets, not knowing, market prices and how that can evolve, especially over a 5 or 10 year term. Can you just speak a little bit more to that intention, maybe just so, we can continue to hear this voice that you want to make it a very sustainable development, and that it's something that won't have a negative impact on local emissions or the power grid?
Yeah, certainly. So it is meeting the LEED Platinum requirements. It is no gas servicing to any of the equipment or the upper floors, and we are working with Eversource currently on options for purchasing those, along with kind of the overall engineering for the building. So we do not have an exact commitment worked out with them yet, but I can try to provide a better update of that in 2 weeks when we come back and see exactly where we stand with those purchases.
Okay, great. I really appreciate it. I mean, again, it's been excellent that you guys are focusing on the green space kind of being the heart of the project and really trying to develop that and make sure that that's a focal point. I think just kind of being consistent with this sustainability throughout the rest of the project would be greatly appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else like to raise any questions or comments of the applicant or staff before I open it up to testimony? Okay, seeing none, we do have 2 separate applications as we have indicated before, so I will take them separately. The first one, I would like to open up public testimony for anybody that wants to speak in support of the 256 to 260 Elm Street application. If you would like to present testimony, please click the raised hand button and I will recognize you in the order in which I see your raised hand. I see 2 members of the development, now 1 member of the 2 members of the development team who had their hands raised. I'll just ask you not, so I don't get confused. I see Tori Antonino, so if Tori could please be unmuted.
This is Raisa speaking. Tori, you have been unmuted. You are self-muted on your end.
Hi, this is Tori Antonina, 65 Boston Street. I stayed on from the previous meeting and I'm just gonna make a public comment because I don't know if I'll be back. So for the lab building, so a few of my thoughts are, I do really appreciate you cleaning up that very bare plaza as it is right now. And I would, what I desperately want to see in the city is vertical green space that is not trees. And anytime a new building is built, you have the opportunity to create, vertical infrastructure on the surface of the building that will allow for vines. And I'm talking about lianas or twining vines, so you're not going to have to worry about the suckering. So things like Lonicera sempervirens, that's our native coral honeysuckle, or Virginia virgin's flower, or Dutchman's pipe, all really spectacular native plants that will just really enliven the space and create more more nature in the area. So that would be one recommendation. The other is, I don't see any solar panels on your roof. I know commercial lab buildings, outside of mechanicals, it's like, well, how much space do you have? But looking at the renderings, like, you got a significant amount of space. And so I would say, would you consider doing some green roof or some biosolar? Again, with our green space, I'm a green space advocate. Any little bit of space that we can have on our roofs for native meadows is really helps our pollinators trying to survive this climate crisis, sixth mass extinction that we're in. I don't see a timer, so I don't know if I'm coming up on time, but yeah, those are some of my concerns. I do wonder if there's going to be any sort of community space or community room. And I think those are my thoughts for now. In general, I support this project. Just love to see it greened up even more. Thank you.
Thank you, Tori. Is there anybody else that wants to speak in support of the application at 256 to 260 Elm Street? Please raise your hand. Once, twice, I will close that portion of the public hearing and open it up to anybody that wants to speak in opposition to 256 to 260 Elm Street or otherwise express concern. Please raise your hand and I'll call on you. Once, twice. None, I will close that portion of the public hearing. Move on to testimony for 270 Elm Street application. I will ask anybody that wants to speak in support of the application at 270 Elm Street, please raise your hand and I'll call. Once, twice, I see Tori.
Teresa speaking. Tori, you have been unmuted. You are self-muted on your end.
Hi again, Tori Antonina, 65 Boston Street. So I just took a look at the landscaping plans, and for me, when I look at a landscaping plan, what I really want to see is what are you planting? And I don't see any. Does not seem to be any plant palette. It just says trees and vegetative matter, so, which is alarming unless I'm missing something, because if the landscape designer is on, I'm sure he knows the importance of planting any indigenous species, plant species, to whatever area you're working on, because insects evolved in spaces where they had indigenous plants. So they depend on native plants. So in plazas, there's a minimum requirement of 50% on native species per our native planting ordinance, but that it's really woeful. Like, there's no reason you can't be putting in 100% native plants. Stunning, beautiful, blow any other plants out of the water that we think we quote unquote need as sort of what we've been habituated to. So, but where are those plans? How do I look at them? And yeah, just a little looking at the design review recommendation for the civic space. Just don't really, it's not as meaty as those documents usually are. So yeah, I just hope you can get the actual species list in there. And I had something else to say, but I forget what it was. So yeah, just like to see more detailed plans on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wants to speak in support of the application of 270 Elm? Once, twice, going 3 times. I will close that portion of the public hearing, open it up to anybody that wants to speak in opposition to 270 Elm Street's application or express concern. Once, twice, 3 times a lady. Seeing none, I will close that portion of the public hearing and bring it back to any further discussion or comments, questions by the planning board. Does anybody have any further comments or questions that they would like to make of the applicant at this time, knowing that we will have hopefully a staff memorandum updated by the next meeting we have? Yes, Amelia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a few comments to add to my previous statement, if I may. And I could hold these until later, but I think it is probably for the good of the project to share them sooner rather than later. So I just want to say, I know I communicated my concerns about sort of the lack of a final pass through all of the submission materials, but like broadly speaking, I am in support of this project. I think it's a great renovation of this space and the addition of something that is appropriate and contextual and well scaled. And I am appreciative of the sustainability requirements that have been responded to appropriately. I have a couple of minor concerns that I'm hoping the applicant can answer either in this meeting or in a future meeting in this process. So please don't feel compelled to answer on your feet right now necessarily. They are on the topics of open space, architecture, and loading. For open space, this is actually quite tied to Tori's comment about not having the tree specifications, but do we feel confident that these trees will thrive in the relatively shaded environment between these two buildings? And is there I guess that's the question, is has the species been selected or specified such that we have a high degree of confidence in that? I'm sure the answer is yes, but as one member of this board, I would feel happier hearing you articulate it. I'd like to understand the balance of the civic space, if any, that will be given up to tenant space, or sort of what the breakdown of tenant patio area versus truly public space where you don't need to have made a purchase to sit down will be, if that's something that you're prepared to articulate now or in the future. On loading, I wanted to raise the question of, I see that the turning plan reflects SU-30s going into the new loading bay, and wanted to hear you confirm that trucks of that size, which I think are sort of standard FedEx box truck kind of size, will be sufficient for the loading of a building of this scale with this mix of uses. I'm sorry, I'm just going to keep running through. And then on architecture, I'm curious whether any consideration was given to a more well-defined cornice line along the very top of the building, or the top of the brick portion. I am not prepared to play designer here, but I'm curious whether that was ever entertained, because I think it might strengthen the sort of partition concept. And finally, on the articulation of the interior alleyway, because you're now sort of proposing that it respond to the Somerville neighborhood character and have clearly given a lot of thought to the activation of this as a civic space in the spirit of our artistic, quirky community, I do think that the sort of facade along the alley space is a little bit clinical, or I would love to hear if you will leave flexibility in some way for tenants to personalize, modify some of that space so that it has more character, more neighborhood character to it. And that might just be about sort of the signage plan. But I feel as though you had all the right things in the aspirational renderings, and I hope that the storefront bay design that you've specified will allow for that flexibility in practice, I guess. So, thank you.
Does anybody else have anything they would like to add for the good of this application before we move to continue them? Okay. Seeing none, I want to thank the applicant for the presentation and
Mr. Chair?
for comments. Yes. Oh, I missed Erin. I'm sorry. You're also small on these stupid boxes.
No worries. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess again, just maybe a couple comments for the applicant team. Also, no need to comment now, but I would love to discuss them later. The applicant team made comment that they are, maybe more experienced as a retail space investor. And given that this is a lab building in a densely populated area, I would really like to dive into how they've approached that as a design team to make sure that, the sort of shell of this building will be well suited to the proposed use. And then maybe jumping over to the civic space or the landscape planting. I would also love to see a planting palette and how they're planning on responding to the low light conditions. As I was reading it, it kind of made me think a little bit of our native New England forests, where you do have some trees that can be low shade or low sun, not everything, but some. And there are also a wide number of 100% native shade tolerant plants, foam flower, Solomon seal, baneberry, like there's whole lists of these kinds of things. So I would love to see a planting palette. And, honestly, the vertical garden comment has been brought up a couple times. And we just talked about the civic space feeling a little clinical. And the side walls of that civic space seeming a little boring. So I'll just make that comment and sort of leave it hanging there. Pun intended. Thank you. Mr. Chair,
No, I'm sorry. I want to thank you. I'm also getting over a cold, so I apologize. Yeah, I actually want to follow up on something Erin just mentioned, is the fact that this has been presented in the renderings to us tonight as a bunch of retail space and cool stuff, but that's not going to be the majority of this building. It's going to, as I understand it, going to be a lab building. And I don't want to talk about that tonight because I do want to see a staff memorandum with proposed conditions before I move forward on asking certain things. But it is certainly going to be an area of discussion that I intend to have with you all in a couple of weeks, when in my feeling it's going to be a little bit more appropriate to ask those questions and make those comments. But I do want to thank Erin for reminding everybody that this is not just going to be Starbucks and the Joshua Tree Redux. It's going to have some more stuff in there that's a little bit more complicated. So does anybody, let me make sure I'm not missing anybody in the squares here. Hollywood Squares, good. Okay, seeing none, I do want to thank the applicant for the presentation this evening. We will see you again in a few weeks. So what I'd like to do is move to continue this application to our meeting on the 6th. Yep, the 16th. I am not at this time going to leave written comment. Actually, you know what? I will, because I'm going to open up the comment period anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the written comment period open to the 10th at noon at planning@somervillema.gov. To the extent anybody does want to provide written testimony between now and then, with the understanding that it will be reopened for oral testimony as well on the 16th. So written comment will be left open until the 10th. I will move to continue this these two applications to the meeting on the 16th, seconded by Amelia. I would ask Raisha to call the roll, please.
This is Raisa speaking. Michael Capilano.
Aye.
Amelia Aboff.
Aye.
Erin Gino.
Aye.
Jahan Habib.
Aye.
Michael McNeely.
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
We have a unanimous vote to continue these agenda items. We will see you in a few weeks. Thank you very much, and have a good weekend.
This is Raisa speaking. I do not believe we took a motion to adjourn the meeting.
We have not, because we have additional items. I'm thanking the applicant. We have two other agenda items, in fact. One is a presentation or a commentary on unit mix diversity. I was hoping Raisa or the appropriate staff member would be able to address something that was raised by Amelia and something that was shared by the board a few weeks ago.
This is Raisa speaking. At this time, I don't have a formal update. I will get that for you at the next meeting. What I can say is the city is reviewing this idea as a part of a larger housing initiative, and that's the only update I have for you at this time.
The other agenda item that we have here are elections. Amelia, did you want to, because you and I had discussed the potential for having a, excuse me, a committee on certain policy initiatives and concerns. I don't know if that's something that we want to raise tonight or we'll continue that for another meeting, but if you want to discuss what you had thought about what we had talked about, I'm certainly excited to bring that before the board for its consideration, or at least the beginning of its consideration right now. Not to put you on the spot.
I wasn't planning to do that tonight, but I can give a quick overview if you'd like me to share
Yeah.
that update, and we can continue it for discussion at a future meeting.
Yeah, for sure. I think that'll be worthwhile. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as I think folks are aware, the planning board has within its scope a number of roles, including not only being the site plan review, not only granting special permits and being an authority that reviews projects on a case basis, but also in providing recommendations to City Council on the governing documents of the city as they relate to planning, including the city's comprehensive plan, summer vision, the zoning ordinance, and sort of other neighborhood plan level documents that may arise. So the board does have fundamentally a scope that includes some of these broader policy-based components, in addition to its scope as a reviewer of projects on a case basis. And I would like to propose that moving forward, the board consider taking up one or two sort of items regularly from a policy perspective to support the city's movement, to support the city's alignment with the comprehensive plan and the goals that we established in the Summer Vision 2040 update. And that might be things like continuing the discussion of the diversity of unit mixes that's been brought up, that the amendment that was proposed to the City Council over the last couple of months to better define the neighborhood meeting process when a councilor is recused. Sort of these sorts of, I think, minor but important process updates that I believe fall well within the board's purview, but which when we get to 9:45 at a meeting are sometimes not at the top of everyone's list to take up. our new rules and regulations allow us to form subcommittees for topics like this. And while I don't think we're quite, I mean, Mr. Chair, I defer to you if you think we're ready to move forward on that. But I think the thought was to begin entertaining some discussion of whether a sort of more policy-focused subcommittee is something that this board would like to establish.
Yeah, so you and I had obviously had a discussion on this informally the other day, and it's something that I think is a great use of the kind of expertise of the various members of the planning board to, instead of having these ad hoc discussions as they come up, to have a more official and proper method by which to consider some of these additional issues that are not just cases. It's we do have broader authority than that. This is something that I would like to discuss at a future meeting, partially because logistically we need to figure out staffing and all things like that, because any community meetings will need to be abided by the open meeting law. We'll likely have to have a staff person, probably RISA, but we don't know. And so we need to figure out how that's going to work. But as a broad idea of moving forward, I would be supportive of voting for a committee to achieve those goals and to bring those discussions to the broader board. We can either have a discussion about it now, or I think it's probably more appropriate to ruminate on it, get some clarity on the logistics of doing this, and then maybe bringing it up at another meeting. But if anybody wants to talk about it now, you certainly can. Okay. Seeing none, I want to thank Amelia for bringing that up and raising that issue, both to me earlier and to the board tonight. On to the last item on our agenda, which are board elections. Every year we generally have elections on the three named offices of the planning board: the chair, the vice chair, and the clerk. And so what I'd like to do is, hey, Erin, have you enjoyed your eminent role as clerk of the planning board?
I feel like my literacy has not degraded and perhaps marginally improved.
Well, if you would be willing to accept the nomination, I would love to nominate you to remain as clerk of the planning board. Do we have a second? I see Amelia's hand first, seconded by Amelia. Risa, could you please call the roll?
This is Risa speaking. Michael Capuano.
Aye.
Amelia Aboff.
Aye.
Jahan Habib.
Aye.
Michael McNeely.
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
Did you call her name?
This is Risa speaking. I believe I've called everyone. Did I miss someone? My apologies.
Erin, did you vote?
I did not, but if I was called on, I would abstain.
Which is usually the practice of the planning board in most circumstances, as well as other bodies on which I've served. So with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yeses and 1 abstention, congratulations, Erin, on remaining our literate champion.
Thank you all for your trust.
I would also say this: I have certainly relied on Amelia over the last several years in being able to take up when I can't, and also being a very thoughtful and professional member of this board who comes here with, I think, great passion, great education and professional background in evaluating some of these applications where somebody who's just a lawyer like me can't always find. So I really value your input and your participation and your friendship. I think you're a great board member, and I would be honored to nominate you to remain another term as vice chair of the planning board. Do we have anyone who would like to second that nomination? I saw Debbie's hand first. So what I'd like to do, are there any other nominations for vice chair? Seeing none, I would ask Raisa to please call the roll.
This is Raisa speaking. Michael Capano.
Aye.
Amelia Aboff.
Abstain.
Aaron Gino.
Aye.
Shahan Habib.
Aye.
Michael McNeely.
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
With 5 yeses and 1 abstention, congratulations, Amelia.
Thank you.
We will talk about further roles, perhaps for you going forward with this new committee as well.
And with that, if I may, with our last remaining position, nominate you, Michael Capiano, to continue as chair. I know I, for one, always appreciate Mike's perspective, how it's informed by his long tenure on the board and his deep knowledge of how the city's evolved over time. And I know this board benefits greatly from his leadership in terms of administration and making sure that everything runs smoothly and gets done. As you noted, you are a lawyer and we can tell, but also for Mike's leadership of this board in terms of tone. I think that as projects have come before us that have become more complicated, that there have often been greater tensions in situations where either an applicant or the community has an issue that's a bit more contentious. And I'm personally incredibly grateful for Mike's leadership of sort of setting the tone for the board so that we can remain an even-keeled public body that is responsive, but also firm in our adherence to our guiding documents and obligations, and keep us on track with our mission of making the city and its projects better for it.
Have we a second?
That motion?
Second. Yep.
I saw Jahan's hand first. Could we please have a roll call vote, Raisa?
Raisa speaking. Michael Capuano.
Aye.
Amelia Aboff.
Aye.
Aaron Gino.
Aye.
Shahan Habib.
Aye.
Michael McNeely.
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
5 yeses and 1 abstention. We have a chair of the planning board for the current term. I want to thank everybody for working through this tonight, as well as a couple of kind of difficult projects that we've got before us. We don't always have kind of 2 big ones back to back, but this is being handled very, very well by my staff and by all of you. So thank you for all of your comments and your questions and your insight on this. I think this makes it a much better process moving forward, and I appreciate all of you. So with that, it is 8:12. Raisa, I'm about 12 minutes past where I thought we would be, so had we wagered, you would have won. So I will move to adjourn at 8:12. Oh, Amelia, yes.
Raising my hand for Michael McNeely.
Oh, I didn't see McNeely.
Thank you. I just wanted
also
to.
a block of text here, that the block of go to webinar that's closing everybody's face off.
Sure. At the end of the
I don't want
meeting.
to see me anyway.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. At the end of the last meeting, we talked a little bit about the future meetings becoming in person again if they didn't update the law and stuff. Can someone refresh me when that kind of kicks in? Like, is the March 16th meeting potentially in person, or is that one still remote?
This is Raisa speaking. I can provide a little bit more information on that. At this time, I believe the extension of that legislation is forward. I don't believe it's been signed by the Senate yet, but I believe the movement is to extend that to March 2025.
Great, thank you for that update.
Okay, the only person I'm blocking right now is me. So I apologize for not seeing like 2 people at once, because that's what I do. Does anybody else have anything?
I'm
Yes.
sorry, I also wanted to add to Member McNeely's question. The previous extension approval ends on March 31st. So there's no issues with the next meeting being remote or not.
Anyone else? Okay, the chair moves to adjourn, seconded by the vice chair. Like a roll call vote by Raisa, please.
This is Rice speaking. Michael Capuano.
Aye.
Amelia Aboff. Aye. Erin Gino.
Aye.
Jahan Habib.
Aye.
Michael McNeely.
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
Words adjourned. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Night.
Perhaps
Night,
earlier.
everybody.
Yeah.
Aye.
Bye.
Thanks.